And so there is no time like the present. Let us go ahead and begin. So hello and welcome everyone, and welcome to Next Steps, how to keep your year-end donors and get the next gift. We are happy to have you joining us today and appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules. My name is Kimberly and I'm part of the QGive team. If you haven't had the opportunity to work with us before, we're an online fundraising platform dedicated to helping nonprofits raise more money, and part of how we do that is through webinars like this one today. Today's webinar will be right around 45 minutes with a Q&A session to follow, keeping our total time together today to just under an hour. We will be recording the presentation and sending each of you a follow-up email, which will include a recording, a copy of the presentation, as well as links to all the resources we discuss. So please be on the lookout for that tomorrow. And we are live tweeting today's webinar highlights at pound QGive webinar. So if you're a Twitter user, please follow us, join the discussion. Our username is QGive. And if you do have questions at any point during the presentation, please go ahead and pop them into the questions box. Our presenter is ready to answer and discuss these during our Q&A portion that follows the presentation. And after today's webinar, you will be prompted to respond to a short survey. So hopefully you can take that. Your feedback is crucial in determining future content for webinars and other resources that we develop throughout the year. Before diving into today's presentation, let's take a peek at QGive's background, mission, and offerings. QGive has been helping nonprofit organizations implement and grow their online fundraising programs since 2007. And as the importance of online giving has grown, our mission has remained the same, and that's to help others fulfill their passion to make a difference. We do that through a comprehensive suite of fundraising tools featuring donation forms, event registration, peer-to-peer fundraising, text giving with outbound messaging, and auction events. We value our relationships and are proud to connect our nonprofit friends to our partner network in hopes that this can help increase your nonprofit's effectiveness and success. And today, we're thrilled to introduce you to one of our strategic partners, Bloomerang, who help nonprofit organizations reach, engage, and retain the advocates they depend on to achieve their vision for a better world through cloud-based donor management application. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our subject matter expert and friend, Stephen Shattuck, Chief Engagement Officer at Bloomerang. And as you'll hear, Stephen brings an enormous amount of experience to the table. So over to you, Stephen.
Cool. Thanks so much, Kim, and Brendan and Abby and Todd, everybody at QGive. I just love QGive, and I'm so appreciative for the invitation and the partnership between QGive and Bloomerang. We've been buddies for a long time. I still remember the first time I visited down in Lakeland and got to know all you so many years ago. So thanks for having me. Thanks for doing that. You guys do awesome webinars. So yeah, thanks for doing this. And you all listening, I'm so glad that you've taken time out of your day to join us. We're gonna have some fun over the next hour or so. So I'm gonna bring up my slides because I got some good stuff for you. But like you heard from Kim, I'm over at Bloomerang, and I'm our Chief Engagement Officer, which is basically just a fancy way of saying I do things like this. I do a lot of presentations that really are just meant to share the things that we learn from the research we do, the research we partner with other people to do, and from just talking to our tens of thousands of customers about the challenges they face in fundraising every day. So that's what I'm going to do for you over the next probably 45 minutes or so, especially as it relates to year-end giving, because it's January. It's like the third or fourth week of January, right? Hopefully you all got some rest. I hope that, number one, I hope you did. And number two, I hope you had a really good year-end season. And now it's time to maybe turn our attention to some of those people who gave to us, between October and December, because we want them to give again. We don't want them to not ever give again. And we also don't want them to wait until next year end to give. We got a whole 9 or 10 months from which we can start to engage them. So that's what I've got for you today. So send in your questions through the chat. We'll save time for those. Tweet, connect with me on LinkedIn, because all the things I'm going to show you really just going to kind of skim the surface of just because of time. But I'm always putting out new research, new case studies, and sharing that knowledge, like I said. So I'd love to connect with you more afterwards. So retention. So if you're here or if you're watching the recording, hi, by the way, I hope you're doing okay. I'm assuming that you are at least somewhat interested in the topic of donor retention. So I just want to take a couple minutes here real quick to give you kind of the lay of the land of where we are at in terms of donor retention as a sector here in the US and Canada, at least, and then kind of explain why I think retention matters, like why you should care about it. Then we will get into some of the technical stuff, or tactical stuff, I should say, around, okay, how are we going to retain these donors that gave to us at year end? So if you follow Bloomerang, or me, or honestly, QGIVE does a really good job of championing the study as well, which I appreciate. One of the things that I'm involved with personally, as well as Bloomerang as kind of a corporate partner, is a group called the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, FEP for short. If you've never heard of FEP, check them out, go to their website, bookmark it. There's all kinds of interesting studies and research and tools that you can use, all for free, kind of centered around this idea of increasing the donor retention rate of your organization. But their kind of key offering, what they're most famous for at FEP, is an annual research study that looks back on the previous year in terms of donor retention to kind of capture how well nonprofits are doing at retaining donors from one year to the next. That's kind of what we mean by donor retention. What percentage of people who gave, for example, in 2020, came back and gave again in 2021? That's what we mean by donor retention. And that can be a calendar year, that can be a fiscal year if you're not on a kind of an annual calendar year, whatever kind of 365-day period that matters to your organization, what percentage of people gave in that and then returned in the following period. Like I said, I'm going to kind of make a case for why you should care about it. But I first want to show you where we are at as a sector in terms of average donor retention rates. So what FEP does is they partner with some of the leading donor management software providers. So Bloomerang being one of them, of course, probably won't surprise you because I'm talking about it, but others that maybe you use yourself now or have heard of, Donor Perfect, Neon. Even though we're all competitors, ostensibly, we actually all collaborate on this project for kind of the good of the sector, which I think is pretty cool, right? How often do you hear about competing companies, working together for the good of the sector they serve in? But what we do is we send FEP at the end of the year, or really the very first week of the year, to be exact, our anonymous transaction data from our customers, so that they can crunch all those numbers, that huge data set, and basically release this report that shows how well all of those nonprofits using those systems did at retaining donors from one year to the next. So we're recording this in late January of 2022. Hard to believe it's 2022. Wow, that was quite a couple of years. But the most recent data I have for you is looking at the 2020 year. So in about a month, I will have FEP will release the 2021 report in terms of donor retention. So I'm going to show you the most recent data we have. And don't worry, because you'll see on the next slide that even though this data is now a year old, quote unquote, for the most part, these retention rates don't really change much from one year to the next. You're going to see that on the next slide specifically. So when that report comes out in probably about a month, like I said, these numbers I don't anticipate changing by up or down maybe 1 or 2 percentage points. And I'm going to talk about why it has been a little bit flat here in a second. But as far as we know, to the best of our knowledge, this is where we're at as a sector, about 44% on an average donor retention rate. This means that 44% of the people who gave in 2019 came back and gave again in 2020. But most importantly, what it means is that 56, 57% of those people did not come back and give. And this is where we've been, kind of between 40 and 45% retention rate. So we lose every single year a little over half of the donors who gave to us in the previous year. So not that great, right? I know it's kind of an unfair comparison, but typically customer retention rates in the for-profit sector, usually around 80 or 90% for really kind of thriving, growing businesses. But for nonprofits, this is kind of the status quo. Overcomeable, there are definitely a lot of organizations, ones that use Bloomerang are the ones that I see primarily that have much higher retention rates than this and have been able to kind of buck the trend. And that's my goal for you over the next hour, 40 minutes now that I've been blabbing already, kind of how you can rise above these average retention rates. Now, one thing that FEP does is that's the average rate. So that's any kind of donor type, whether it's their second gift or their 100th gift, whether they gave $5 or $5,000, whether they gave online or in person or an event or peer-to-peer, it's everybody rolled into one package. What I think is much more useful and actually particularly germane to this topic of year-end giving is that first-time donor retention rate, only 19%. So only 19% of people who gave their first and only gift in 2019 came back and gave again in 2020. So 80%, over 80% of first-time donors don't make a second gift. And the reason I think that's germane to this conversation is what I have observed through Bloomerang data, at least, and I don't think this is unique for us, but a lot of year-end gifts tend to be first-time gifts. They tend to be a very high donor acquisition activity. You think about Giving Tuesday, a lot of donor acquisition for the first time. So when we talk about you retaining year-end gifts, a lot of those year-end givers, I would imagine for you listening, were first-time donors. So it's really important that we get that second gift because you can see what happens. It goes from 19% to almost 60%. If you can get a second gift, if you can get people giving on an ongoing basis, those retention rates really exponentially increase. So we're going to talk a lot about this concept of getting the second gift from donors kind of within the context of year-end giving as a whole. So that's where we're at. Like I said, in about a month, we'll have the updated numbers, but I don't anticipate them changing very much. So don't feel bad that, we're doing this in late January, because you can see that for every year, it's 1% up, 1% down, 2% down, 2% up. It doesn't really change very much year over year. And I think that 2020 being such a challenging year only reinforces that, right? It pretty much stayed within that, common ebb and flow that we have seen over the last, not just 5 years, like you're seeing on the screen, but all the way back to 2005 for the first time we've been looking at this at FEP. So I would imagine that 2021 rate will be 44%, maybe 45%, could be a little higher. I don't think it'll be lower. And if it's lower, it won't be that much lower. The point is, it's like that 2% of GDP, right? That nonprofits represent or fundraising represents doesn't really change much, which I think is an opportunity for you folks who are, listening and investing in yourself to maybe rise above, these kind of average retention rates. And a lot of it starts with those year-end givers, just because of the volume of people that come in the fourth quarter. Now, I know I said that these haven't changed very much over the last few years. The one exception would be that first time rate. This is one that I'm keeping my eye on, and people at Bloomerang and people at FEP are looking at, that has been dropping kind of steadily. For whatever reason, it seems to be getting harder and harder to get a first-time donor to make a second gift. Now, I could be wrong, in a month when we get the new data and maybe it rebounds to 20 or 21%. I think that would be awesome. I hope that happens. Could go down to 18 or 17%. That wouldn't surprise me either. But I do think there is something kind of interesting going on in the sector as more and more people can give online, and sort of those technological barriers to giving are dropping, which is really good, by the way. But one thing we're also going to talk about is kind of this idea of digital stewardship, when people are giving through kind of transactional channels, like maybe social media or online giving or other sort of very easy ways to give, which is good. Like I said, we as fundraisers might have to work a little bit harder to get those people to come back and make that second gift. So we're going to look at that as well, again, within the context of year-end giving. Now, I don't have the 2021 data, as I've mentioned a couple of times, but I feel like we're going to see some positivity there, because there was a lot of positivity in 2020 that we didn't see in 2018 and 2019 particularly, which surprised me when this research came out around this time last year, because again, 2020 was so hard. But we had double-digit increases in giving, and almost double-digit increases in the amount of people giving, which was really good. We also had a big influx of new donors in 2020. which again speaks to the need of maybe focusing on that channel, because if we had a lot of new donors, but that donor retention rate continues to fall, that may be damaging to our bottom line if we don't get those people to give. So not only was that really positive, but we also have some research, some survey data into donor expectations of what they were expecting to give in 2021. And a majority of those donors surveyed by Penelope Burke at Cygnus Research, they said that they would give as much in 2020 or more in 2021. So I expect some nice numbers there. I don't expect a lot of declines in that 2021 data, which to me speaks to an even greater need to focus on these year-end donors, because most revenue comes in at year-end. It comes in during Q4. Every Q4 has been bigger than the previous one, sometimes by as much as 10%. So again, when I have this next month, and if you connect with me or follow Bloomerang or follow QGive, I'm sure you'll see it. I would expect another 5 to 10% increase in that Q4. So that is why I have put together this presentation, because year-end, so much philanthropic activity happens there. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know. I'm hoping you saw that yourselves last quarter, but it really speaks to the need to focus on retaining those people. So why should you do that? Well, the very simple fact of the matter is, the higher the retention rates at your organization, the higher the lifetime value of your donors, which means more revenue. It really is that simple. So let me show you this quick illustration. What you're seeing on the screen now is just a comparison of two hypothetical nonprofit organizations. One has a 41% retention rate, which is about average, maybe a little bit lower than average, and one has a 51% retention rate. So 10% difference. Doesn't seem like that much of a difference, 41 to 51%. But at an average database size of $5,000 and an average gift size of $200, the organization with a 51% retention rate is raising almost $500,000 more from those retained donors, that 10% increase in retained donors, than their counterpart at 41%. So it does not take a really big increase in donor retention to generate a lot of extra revenue that you weren't seeing previously. So sometimes, like, Bloomerang customers will email me or chat me, or I'll see them at an event or something like this, and they'll say, okay, I get it, but like, what retention rate should I shoot for? Should I shoot for 50% or 60% or 80%? And I say, not necessarily. What are you at now? Can you increase it? Can you increase it by 1%? Can you increase it by 5 or 10%? Because, and I've seen it, they'll come back to me and say, wow, we went from 45% to 47% retention, and we saw this increase in revenue. So I want to encourage you, first of all, kind of know where you're at. And most databases, you should be able to get to this, depending, it might be easier in some versus others, but know that number and then set that goal for yourself. Tell your board, like, hey, this is what would happen. And I think that will help them, maybe give you the freedom or the time to do some of the tactical things that I'm going to suggest here coming up. So this is the average rate. So looking at that first time rate, this is the exact same exercise, except it's top to bottom here. Top organization has a 20% first time donor retention rate, again, about average. Bottom organization has a 30% first time donor retention rate. And you can see almost $250,000 more just because of that 10% increase in brand new donors. So it doesn't take much is the bottom line here. Can you increase it 1%, 5%, 10%? 10% is really transformative for sure. This spreadsheet you're seeing, I can send you. You can plug in your own numbers or whatever retention rate you're shooting for, your average gift size, your database size, and you can see for yourself what would happen at your exact organization if you could change your retention rates by whatever you want to look at. So we'll email that to you. I'll get it to Kim somehow. But that could be, again, a fun exercise for maybe your boss or your board to say, hey, maybe we should pay attention to this because look what happens in terms of the revenue from those folks. So that's where we're at. And that's kind of my case on why it matters. And so if you're locked in, if you're bought in, I think the next kind of logical question is, okay, why do we have these retention rates? Why do people keep giving? Why do people stop giving? And we've got a lot of research on this. There's a lot of people looking at this. Adrian Sargent, who you see on your screen, Penelope Burke, Jen Shang, the guys over at Donor Voice, guys and gals, like there's a lot of people studying this. And I'm going to kind of cherry pick a couple of studies here that I think are kind of good at illustrating really the key findings that all of these studies basically conclude. Donors haven't really changed their behavior, their psychology very much at all over the past 20 years for sure. And I would venture to guess, and be bold and say that probably 50 to 100 years, these are still the same reasons. But Adrian Sargent, who I mentioned, who's on the screen now, he's been looking at donor retention for decades. He's obsessed with it in a good way. He's one of my heroes. He did the study back in 2001 where he reached out to 10 very large kind of national nonprofits here in the US. The idea was that they had a lot of lapsed donors. So he surveyed those lapsed donors and basically asked them, hey, why did you stop giving? You used to give, what happened here? And these were the top reasons that those lapsed donors gave, the ones that did answer, and enough answered to give kind of a statistically relevant study here. Now, a couple of these are not going to be controllable by us, right? Donors had passed away. They did like a deceased suppression to find that out. A little over half said that they had financial difficulties, which, by the way, is always the top reason in these kinds of studies if you look them up. But the ones that are kind of controllable by us, they didn't think that the organization needed them as a donor. They didn't get information on how the donation money was spent. They didn't get thanked. They didn't remember supporting. When I think about stewardship overall, not just at year end, but at any time, if you can focus on the thanking and the reporting on outcomes or the impact of the giving, that's your 10%, right? If you focus just on those two things, and that's not the only things you can focus on. In fact, I'll suggest a couple of other things. But if you want that 10% increase, let's talk about thanking and reporting. So we're going to look at, okay, how can we do that specifically with year-end donors, because they're a little bit different, and how you do that, I think, is a little bit more nuanced compared to donors, kind of throughout the rest of the year. And like I said, all of these research studies, again, basically come to the same conclusion. Here's another one that was done by Donor Voice 10 years later, completely different data set, similar methodology, except they asked loyal donors, kind of retained donors, in other words, why they keep giving. And you see the same kinds of answers there. They thought they were effective, right? They were thanked. They had stories told. They received information on who was helped and what the organization is doing. Again, these concepts that I kind of define as stewardship mostly boil down to the thanking and the storytelling. What is it that money that you donated made happen through the services and through the mission of the organization? And you don't want to put too much power and responsibility in the donor's hands. That can lead to some bad outcomes. But saying thank you and giving those donors an idea of what it is that their gift was going towards, getting to know them. We're going to talk about these things, keeping that line of communication open. That is what we see over and over in this donor loyalty research that really moves the needle. So thinking of those things in mind, how can we do that for year-end donors specifically? Because like I said, they're a little bit different. They're a little bit more nuanced. How should we thank year-end donors? Right? There's all kinds of talking heads like me that are saying, you should thank your donors more, you should thank your donors better. We're going to look at specifically how we should do that for year-end donors. How can we tell those stories, right? Because it's an interesting time of year. Maybe you've just wrapped up a big campaign, or some big goals are coming to an end, and you've got a whole year in front of you, right? That you are maybe going to want to start to talk about or communicate or sort of preview to the donor. How are we going to do those things? How can we speak to the donor about what they should expect in this year coming up? That's what we're going to talk about. So now that I've kind of set the table, let's get into the tactical stuff. What are we actually going to do with these year-end donors so that they give and give quickly? We're not just going to wait till next year. We don't have to wait for a full year anniversary to transpire before they give again. And in a lot of cases, you may be able to get a second gift from these people in February or March even. So I'll kind of lay out a timeline for you there. So there's a lot of ways to tackle this. And I've only got probably 25 more minutes with you. I think the best bang for your buck, or maybe the lowest hanging fruit you can focus on, is this power of segmentation. A lot of that donor loyalty research has kind of this underlying theme of you want to talk to your donors in as targeted a way as possible, because amongst your year-end donors, and I wrote about this on the QGIV blog very recently. I think we'll share that if you haven't seen it. This concept of year-end donors is kind of too broad to be truly useful, right? Because within year-end donors, people who give between maybe Thanksgiving and New Year's or whatever that definition is, there's probably a lot of different types of people. Maybe it was their first gift. Maybe it was their 10th gift. Maybe they're a monthly donor. You know, how did they give to you? What channel? Did they give online? Did they come to an event? Did they, return a BRE through the mail with a check in it? Those kinds of things you might want to think about as you decide how to communicate to them. Did they give to a specific campaign or a fund? Did you have a year-end campaign? Were you in a capital campaign? Did you do something on Giving Tuesday? How much did they give? If it was their first gift, was it above or below your average gift amount? If it was their 10th gift, did they upgrade or downgrade? Was it a monthly donor who gave an extra gift beyond their sort of 12 gift commitment? And do you know something about them? Their reason for giving, why they care about your cause? Because your cause may have a lot of kind of different subject areas. If you're an environmental organization, maybe you're touching on animals versus nature and habitats. You may want to communicate things to those people differently. So when I say you should be running kind of a year-end donor campaign, it's not good enough to just say, okay, here's all the people that gave in November and December. Let's put them all in a bucket and let's send, one communication stream to them. I would recommend you not do that. You might want to drill into specific donor types, donor frequencies, and reasons for giving. For example, let's say you go into your Bloomerang or your Razor's Edge or Donor Perfect or whatever you're using. You run a report of all your year-end donors. Okay, let's add an additional filter, for example, and find, okay, how many of those people, it was their first gift. These are our new donors who gave at year-end. Boom, we're going to do a campaign for them. And then you add a different filter that's, okay, here's all of our monthly donors that also gave an extra gift at year-end. Okay, we're going to do something special for those people. And you can go on and on. You can go as deep as you want. And the deeper you go, I think the better your communications will be, because you can speak to these people in different ways. You can say, hey, thanks so much for making your first gift. Welcome, send them a welcome kit, and kind of welcome them into your family of supporters. Versus your monthly donors who maybe they gave on Giving Tuesday. And it's like, hey, you're a monthly donor. Brendan, thanks so much for being a monthly donor. Notice you also gave on Giving Tuesday. We didn't expect that. That wasn't something that we anticipated because you're already a monthly donor and, that's kind of locked in. But we just didn't want that to go unrecognized. We noticed that happened. When you do things like that, that is really what increases the chances that those people will give again, rather than this kind of one size fits all where it's like, okay, here's our year-end thank you letter and everybody's going to get that if they give between October and Halloween and New Year's Eve, regardless of these filters. So if you can, if your technology allows it, if you've got the time, I would really recommend kind of running these reports. This is basically just report filters to put it quite simply. It really will pay dividends in terms of the quality of your stewardship. So let me show you an actual example of this in practice. This is not necessarily a year-end segmentation strategy, but it is something that I think everyone watching can kind of emulate, at least to some point. This is Heather. She's one of my favorite customers. She runs a public school foundation up in New York State. And she's like the queen of segmentation, right? I think it's her goal to break Bloomerang. If anybody's going to do it, it's going to be her. And she has a lot of these different segments or groups of people that she communicates to differently because they all are giving for different reasons. Potentially they're giving it different gift amounts, they're giving it different levels and frequencies and recencies. And basically what she does, and what I would recommend, is that you simply acknowledge what bucket they are in. In other words, dear Heather, thanks for your first gift. Dear Kim, thanks for being a monthly donor. Or, hey, Brendan, we noticed that you gave on Giving Tuesday and it was your first gift. Thanks so much. Donors kind of like it when you tell them what kind of donor they are. You don't need to say like, hey, you're in segment number 7 and here's a thank you letter, but just acknowledging, hey, you gave a couple times this year and you gave at year end. Wow, thank you. Or, hey, you were a monthly donor and you gave an extra gift on New Year's Eve. That was awesome. We didn't expect that. If you are simply acknowledging kind of those interesting moments, I think another way of putting this is they are interesting moments. It's their first gift. It was an upgrade. They volunteered and donated, whatever those things are. It's really, really powerful because it shows the donor that you're paying attention, and it allows you to kind of craft a story around that, right? First time donors, they get a welcome kit. Monthly donors, maybe they get a special exclusive kind of monthly donor VIP newsletter or an invitation to something that nobody else gets. But when you do this, again, it really kind of shows that donor that you're paying attention. And I think, and I've seen this happen, it definitely increases the likelihood that they continue to give. And Heather, a lot of money raised, really high retention rate. And I really think it's because of the segmentation. Whenever I look at Bloomerang customers that have a retention rate kind of higher than that 45% average in that neighborhood, one of the first things I always notice in their database is they're doing some kind of segmentation. So if you send out a welcome kit to brand new donors, you're doing segmentation, like you're there. It's just, can you do more? What are some other types of things that you could do? So let me give you some specific year-end segments that I think that you should kind of focus on here. So broadly, let's define year-end for the purposes of this presentation. I'm going to say November 1st to New Year's Eve, maybe longer or shorter for you, no problem. But whatever you define as year-end, the year-end season, make a goal for yourself that we're going to thank all those people by this date. Maybe it's February 1st, maybe it's January 27th, whatever is feasible for you. But I find it really useful to put a deadline on it. That way you don't creep into February and it's like, oh dang, we haven't gotten to those people, because you saw from the research that one of the top things they care about is the fact that they get thanked and get thanked quickly as possible. Now, ideally, if I was giving this presentation in December, I would say thank them as they come in and don't wait until January, but that's not very useful to you. But maybe next year, or I guess it's this year, that may be a goal that you want to set for yourself for this coming Q4. They're like, hey, as those year-end gifts are coming in, let's try to get the thank you out the door as fast as possible rather than kind of waiting. I know that's hard. You may get buried in gifts and there's a lot of things going on. You got the holidays, maybe you want to take some time off. But broadly, set some kind of deadline. That way you don't get into Valentine's Day. It's like, oh dang, we haven't thanked these people. So previous giving. So I've talked about this. If it's not their first gift, definitely want to segment those people out and do kind of that welcome kit. But if it's their second gift in the year, if they're a monthly donor who gave that extra 13th gift, like I said, tell them, say that in the thank you, right? Maybe it's the little handwritten note in the PS, maybe it's part of the actual letter template, but acknowledge what it is that they did that kind of stood out to you. What was that interesting moment? What was that thing that you noticed maybe through going through this exercise of being kind of special, right? Maybe they gave way more than they have in the past, an upgrade. That I think is an interesting moment. Maybe they're a lapsed donor who they didn't give in, they gave in 19, didn't give in 20, but came back and gave again in 2021. Say, hey, we're glad to have you back. We missed you. Thanks so much for supporting. Don't call them a lapsed donor. Don't make them feel bad. But again, just kind of speak to what it is that they did. Tell the donor what kind of donor they are in that kind of nice way that shows that you're paying attention. And you might even want to say like, hey, you gave it Giving Tuesday. You had a lot of choices. Thanks for choosing us. I know it was a busy day of giving. Hey, 2021 really stunk, right? It was a hard year for everybody, but thanks to donors like you, we were able to achieve these goals, and we've got some awesome things coming for 2022. So don't be afraid to kind of write those things in. Great thing to base your little PS note, right? If you have kind of a generic thank you letter, just fine. It goes to everybody, but you customize the PS, like thanks for giving on Giving Tuesday. Thanks for your first gift. Thanks for supporting us so many times during 2021. Thanks for being a monthly donor. That will stand out beyond just kind of that templated letter, because most people are just going to get that templated letter that doesn't have that customization. And they may, as a donor, have felt that that was really meaningful, right? They may think like, wow, I was a monthly donor and I gave at year end and I gave on Giving Tuesday. I did this extra thing. Did they notice that? And if you notice that, you're going to make a friend for life. Giving Tuesday, this is one I feel very strongly on. Run that report of all your year-end donors and then add a filter for December 1st or whatever Giving Tuesday was. And thank those people for their Giving Tuesday gift. Thank you for your Giving Tuesday gift, because it's such a busy day. They probably got a gazillion emails from every nonprofit that they ever, drove by in their entire life, but they chose you, and maybe they chose some others, but they chose you. So thank them for that. Thanks for giving on Giving Tuesday. Now, the value of this, if you are thanking people as they come in, is that if Giving Tuesday is late November, early December, like it normally is, and you thank them and you get that Giving Tuesday thank you out the door, you've got 2 to 4 weeks left in December where, okay, they've been thanked. Maybe now we can go back to them even before New Year's Eve and perhaps ask again. Now, that's something you got to be really careful with, but there is kind of value to getting that out the door. And then first-time donors, really filter those people out. Get them that welcome kit. To the extent that you can thank them personally, do so. Call them, send them a personal email, a handwritten note, lots of research. And I'm going to get into that research here in a second, that the more you can thank donors personally, first-time donors, the higher the chances that they will give again. And also going to recommend that you ask first-time donors to give that second gift before the end of March. And I've got some research to back that up. So again, if you do a good job of thanking these first-time donors at year end, you can, there is a good chance you can get them to give again before the end of the first quarter. There is kind of a honeymoon period that we have found with these first-time donors, particularly if you thank them personally, but we'll get into that. So what I mean by personal, phone calls, we saw a real big difference amongst Bloomerang customers that called donors versus the ones who did not call donors. The ones that did call donors on average had about an 18% year-over-year change in revenue from 2020 to 2019. The people who didn't call donors, about a 15% reduction in revenue from 2019 to 2020. Phone calls are really powerful. If you get a phone number, I'm not suggesting that you go out and like research someone's phone number or like call their office or anything like that, but it really does seem to be effective. I think personally, the pandemic has made this really powerful. A lot of people are isolated. Certainly people were very isolated in those early days of the pandemic, and hearing from a charity that they support, maybe one of the only times that they get such personal outreach that isn't from their family or friends, if they even have that. So again, it's a really good opportunity for nonprofits to stand out. Quick phone call, voicemails are just as good. This did not differentiate between voicemails and live pickups at all. I would imagine most of these went to voicemail actually. But hey, Brendan, thanks so much for giving. We really appreciate that year-end gift. You saw you gave on Giving Tuesday, saw it was your first gift, whatever that thing is. Just wanted to thank you for that support at year-end. Click, that's it. Doesn't really take that much. Personal emails. Now, what I mean is not a MailChimp, not an email blast out of Constant Contact or Bloomerang, but you're literally opening up Gmail or Outlook and you're typing in, Brendan at qgive.com from Steven at bloomerang.com, and you're writing one person, one email. Hey, Kim, thanks so much for being a monthly donor. Monthly donors like you really carried us through 2021. So appreciate that support. Notice you gave an extra gift at year end. that was awesome. Didn't expect that, and just didn't want that to go unnoticed. So thank you for that. End of email. Not really a big thing there. And then in-person interactions, to the extent that you can do them. And we actually saw a lot of Bloomerang customers use this in-person field to log things like Zoom calls and FaceTime calls and live streaming, even in small groups. Those things are also good. So for example, you run that report of all your year-end donors, you isolate it to just first-time donors who gave at year-end. Maybe you organize a lunch and learn, or maybe a fireside chat for brand new donors in the last week of January, where they can hear from your ED or a subject matter expert or a service recipient of yours to kind of help them get to know the organization. That I would definitely count as kind of an in-person interaction, in addition to getting together if you can do that safely. These personal touches we saw again and again amongst our customers in the ones that were having really good 2020s and 2021s. And it was the folks that maybe weren't doing some of these things that perhaps struggled a little bit. So here's an example of a personal email at year end, kind of pushing the boundaries of year end here, but it was definitely in November. This is an organization where I became a monthly donor. By the way, if someone's first gift is a monthly commitment, that's a really interesting moment. Most people do not do that. Most monthly donors start off with kind of a one-time gift a few times and then become a monthly donor. So that could be another interesting filter that you run on all of your year-end donors. Did someone start a monthly commitment? Because this is the kind of email that you want to send to those people. Thanks for becoming a monthly donor, right? Again, donors want to know, they like to hear what kind of donor they are. Thanks for becoming a monthly donor. Thanks for your first gift. Thanks for giving on Giving Tuesday. Again, all those things I've already talked about. I think you get the idea. Say it back to them. Show them that you're paying attention. But I like this email because it talks a little bit about the mission. You're giving us the ability to make a big impact. I made a quick 2-minute video for you to share what your monthly gift does for us. And I clicked that, and there was this nice little video where he talks right to me and talks about all the great things that monthly donors specifically make possible for their organization. So video, again, I think if you maybe don't have a phone number and you don't want to do in person, if you can't, or if it's not safe or whatever, video is great. Talking right into the webcam. You can do this a million ways. You can use your smartphone, you can use YouTube. Don't let the technology, you can use this Vidyard tool, which is really good. But videos could be a really nice way to thank those donors personally as well. Totally disposable video, only going to watch it once, but really made an impact on me. And I think it's like still the only thank you video I've ever gotten. And this was now a few years ago. Phone calls. So I talked a little bit about phone calls. There's a lot of research out there that kind of floats around, blogs and webinars about how effective phone calls are, but we put it to the test at Bloomerang specifically. We looked at our customers that called first-time donors specifically versus the ones who don't. And again, I'm guessing that a lot of year-end donors are going to be first-time donors. It's a really heavy donor acquisition period. So here's some encouragement to maybe call these people. Again, if you have a phone number. We saw retention rates go from 33% to 41% with one phone call, and then almost 60% if they got more than one phone call within the first 90 days. That's where this 90-day kind of honeymoon period comes from that I mentioned earlier. This is kind of your opportunity to maybe capitalize on those positive feelings that they still have after becoming a donor. This is a thank you phone call. It's not a solicitation. This is a stewardship phone call. And we, again, did not differentiate between live pickups and voicemails. It was simply, was a call logged to these first-time donors? So higher retention rate. We also found that among donors who were called, they gave the second gift faster than donors who did give a second gift but weren't called. That window shrunk from 261 days to 53 days, so under 2 months. So again, this idea of, hey, you can ask for that second gift, but much more likely that you're going to get it if there has been this personal outreach specifically by phone. Again, voicemails are just as good. And we found that the average gift size basically doubled amongst those who gave but didn't get a phone call versus the ones who did get a phone call. So this is an awesome, pretty dead simple strategy for at least first-time donors. So what I would do, run your report, all your year-end donors, add the filter, was it their first gift? And then add the filter or the column, depending on how your database works. Do you have a phone number? And that's your call list. Really good activity for January. Maybe things are a little bit slower depending on what you got going on. Maybe not, maybe you're really busy, and I understand that too, but can you carve out a half hour every Friday in January, right? And call all those people and just say, hey, Brendan, thanks so much for giving. We noticed it was your first gift to us. Just wanted to say welcome to the, our community, our family of supporters, whatever you say. And maybe strive to get to know them a little bit. Hey, we'd love to know how you heard about us, why you're interested. We would love to talk to you. Because we saw that from the research. I didn't really spend a lot of time on it, but donors kind of like it when you are, kind of curious about them. And if they give you some good information, I think that will help you send even better communications to them, subsequent of that first outreach. So what you should do in those first 90 days, well, we got the phone call. By the way, I would recommend downloading this and maybe changing things around or moving things around depending on what makes sense for your organization. But this is what high-performing nonprofits who use Bloomerang, these are the things that we saw them do for first-time donors to really move that needle. And again, I keep harping on first-time donors because Q4 is such a heavy donor acquisition period. So the phone call, maybe they get that thank you letter in the mail, a survey. Hey, who are you? How did you hear about us? Why do you care about us? That's a good thing to get because they're a brand new donor. They may not know you very much. And maybe they don't know you very much, which is why tour invitations are really useful for first-time donors. Maybe they get your monthly newsletter, right? Maybe another phone call because you saw the power of multiple phone calls. And then within that first 90 days, you are going to solicit them again. I wouldn't solicit them within 90 days if you haven't done any of these things in the middle. But if you do, much more likely that second gift solicitation is going to be more successful if you've done a good job kind of stewarding them. So download this, have that plan for yourself. And you don't have to do it for just first-time donors. It can be for monthly donors. It can be for Giving Tuesday donors, whatever kind of segment you want to create a plan for. The more you do that, the better. And the plans may look really similar. That's okay. But the more kind of documentation and ways to hold yourself accountable you have, I think the more likely it is that these things get done. Mentioned welcome kits. Hopefully there's a lot of welcome kits going out in January. Again, just to first-time donors, welcome them to the community of donors. Thanks for your first gift. Here's a little bit more information about us because they're new. This is one I thought was kind of cool. They sent me their most recent print newsletter because I kind of gave off schedule and it was going to be a while till I got the next print newsletter, but they just sent the previous one so I could kind of catch up. I thought that was cool. But the point is, it's something that only first-time donors get. It's something that only monthly donors get. Mention surveys, a survey to first-time donors, a survey to monthly donors, because that was the number 4 thing from that research is donors like that opportunity to kind of, talk about themselves or explain their philanthropic goals. And you can do a lot of things, to send surveys. We've got it in Bloomerang, but you don't need Bloomerang to send a donor survey. Don't feel bad. SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, you can use a lot of those tools, but I would get those surveys out the door to those specific constituency groups or segments that you create because, January is a nice time of year to maybe collect that information because it can kind of guide your efforts for the rest of the year. And you don't have to guess what you should send. They'll tell you. They'll tell you what they're interested in. Then you can, communicate accordingly. Last thing, I would be remiss not to mention peer-to-peer on a QGIve webinar. We actually collaborated. We co-wrote an ebook on this topic about how to retain peer-to-peer donors specifically. I almost out of time, but we've got that ebook. Grab the ebook; it's free. But basically, that's the segment. right? If you've done a lot of peer-to-peer in Q4, maybe around Giving Tuesday or, just year end in general, those donors are people that are a segment that you might want to communicate to differently than all the other groups. But don't forget the fundraiser, right? You also want to retain the fundraiser. It's not just about donor retention, but it's also about fundraiser retention, because you want all those awesome peer-to-peer fundraisers to go out again and do that for you next Giving Tuesday or earlier. So grab that ebook. We could spend a whole hour. I could probably spend 8 hours talking about this, but we put it all in that ebook, and it's pretty chock full of good stuff. So thanks to QGive for working with me on that. But that's a segment, and that's a perfect example, in addition to first-time donors, monthly donors, Giving Tuesday donors, that you might want to talk to differently. So make it a priority, right? I kind of made the case for that increase in revenue that it can generate for you. Get that spreadsheet. We'll send that out, and you can plug in your own numbers, and you can kind of see for yourself. Segmentation is everything. Run that report from Halloween to New Year's Eve, all those donors, and then start to look for, okay, what are the subgroups? First-time donors, monthly donors, all the Giving Tuesday people, peer-to-peer donors, and then start to talk to those people differently. And if you have a written plan for each of those groups, it's just going to be much easier to do these things. So I would love to hear how it goes. Email me, connect with me on LinkedIn, because I would love to hear from you. And also, you'll see when some of this newer research comes out here in a few weeks, hopefully. Lots of resources on our website. They're all free. If you're interested in Bloomerang, if you're using QGive, but you maybe need a new donor database, we've got an awesome integration. It's like my favorite integration, and we'll make you a special deal. Just say, hey, we're a QGive person. What's the Bloomerang discount? We'll make something happen there. Tell them you were on this webinar. Tell them Steven sent you. Whatever you want to say, because I want you folks who are listening to me babble on for an hour here to get something out of it beyond just this information. And that's eligible all year long. So Kim, I think we've got a few minutes for questions, right?
We do,
Cool.
Stephen. And just for everyone, we do have a couple questions, and we may go a minute or so over, if that's okay. It's okay with me. I do want you to know that Christy had a very early question of what is the difference between average and repeat?
Yeah, so average, so I think this was the retention rates. So the average retention rate around 40-45%. That's all donor types that were part of the study. So it was any donor that was retained. So it could have been their second gift, it could have been their 50th gift. Didn't matter how much they gave, through what channel, they were retained. So that's the average rate. So that's kind of a good baseline. And if you run a report in your database for your own retention rate, it'll encompass everyone in there that has been retained. But I think that's kind of useful only to a point, and that's why we look at first time and repeat. So repeat donors are people that have given 2 or more gifts, and then first time donors are people that have just given that one-time gift. So what we see is that first time rate being so low, 19%, it's kind of dragging down the average. And that's why I spent so much time, kind of candidly, on that first time rate. Because if you can get a second gift from your donors, that is really what makes some awesome things happen for your overall average retention rate. So that's a good place to start.
Christy had a follow-up question about repeat donor retention. She said, assumes it means monthly partner subscriber. She would love to learn your formula for repeat donor retention, i.e. how many cancels in a year? 1, 2, 3, etc.
So the repeat rate is not just your monthly donors. Although monthly donors would be part of that repeat rate. So in the same way that first time donors drag down the average rate, monthly donors drag it upwards because they're retained every single month. But for the cancellation, so what that rate is looking at is they make at least 2 gifts within 1 year, and they give 2 years consecutively. So a monthly donor is going to do all those things. But for a monthly donor, I wouldn't necessarily consider a monthly donor lapsed if they gave 10 months in a row and missed the 11th month and then came back in the 12th month, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I like kind of calendar year to calendar year. So for example, if you got a monthly donor who gave every single month in 2019, they canceled in 2020, but maybe they gave a couple of one-time gifts in 2020, that would still be a repeat donor. That wouldn't be a lapsed donor at all. But monthly donors, those retention rates are upwards of 90%. So even higher than that repeat rate, because monthly donations are super sticky. So another way to really increase your retention rates overall is to have that a robust monthly giving program, because those people, only about 10% of the time do they stop giving. But again, that's a whole other conversation, a whole other topic, but definitely something that will help is if you really spend some time on generating monthly gifts for sure.
All right. Well, Amber had a question. She said, did you have any recommendations for large donors? Should they be recognized differently with things like swag?
So I'm not a huge fan of segmenting by gift amount necessarily. I think someone who gave you $20, they may be on a very limited budget, and that could be a really meaningful gift to them. Whereas, someone who gave $1,000, that they may be wealthy and that didn't really kind of hurt they didn't really like feel that donation. So I would say that as a caveat. What I like to do for swag is look at frequency and recency. For example, I think monthly donors are the best candidates for swag. In other words, they've made a commitment, right? They really like you, or else they probably wouldn't be giving monthly. Even if it's $5 a month, that's still, $70 a year. I think, yeah, $70 a year. I was an English major, not a math major. And then, at a 90% retention rate, that's like over $1,000 in terms of lifetime value. So I would look at monthly donors first for swag. Maybe it's a sticker, maybe it's a t-shirt. Sticker, I'm a big sticker fan, as some of you might know. I write a lot about this. A monthly donor, hey, here's a sticker, because they like you so much, they'll probably put that sticker on their water bottle or their car and kind of continue to be an advocate for you. But I wouldn't just go off of the dollar amount, because that's where things like wealth screening may come into play, and it's like, oh, $1,000 to this person is really nothing. It may mean a lot to you as an organization. And maybe you want to communicate how much you appreciate that, but swag may not necessarily be the best vehicle to do that. And I would also look at first-time donors, because they may not know much about you as an organization. So if swag includes things like maybe a brochure or a pamphlet, or maybe even a sticker, to kind of welcome them into that community of donors, I would look there as well. I think monthly donors is where I would start there, because they're already kind of really engaged with you, and those are kind of your VIP folks.
Okay. Alex has asked, is it too late to make those Giving Tuesday thank you phone calls now?
No, it's not too late. No. Nope.
Okay.
Not at all.
I'm sure that's a relief.
Do it.
And Carolyn has asked, how do we calculate donor retention in our databases? Do you have some guiding resources?
So it depends on what you're using, and email me and let me know. I can kind of help with that. If you use Bloomerang, you get it automatically. But usually it's just a report of people that gave last year and this year, and you get that number, and then you divide it by the total amount of people in your database. It's usually that simple, but it could be a little bit more nuanced depending on what product you're using. But reach out to the support team at whatever product you're using, because I'm guessing that's not the first time they've gotten that question, and should be able to tell you how to create that report. But it's a good thing to be looking at every once in a while.
Okay, Kelly is asked, what do you recommend to be in a welcome kit without being too much or overwhelming?
Yeah, I think that's something that you might want to test. Let me go back to some of the examples I had in my slides. I think the number one thing is that there's a letter or a thank you note that tells the donor that it was their first gift. Thank you for your first gift. thanks for joining the community of donors, or we saw that it was your first gift. Thank you for that. That to me is the most critical thing. It should be different than all of your other thank you letters. Now from there, you've got some options. And yeah, you could overwhelm. I think these two examples are maybe on the heavier side, but I'm kind of a philanthropy dork, so maybe they knew that going in, and it's okay for me. But I think that in general, keep in mind that they're new. They may not totally understand the full scope of what your organization does. Even though they're already a donor and they were convinced to donate, they may not totally understand. So a piece of literature or a URL, if it's an email welcome kit, a video to watch, something that can maybe bring them up to speed on the full awesomeness like that your organization does. And maybe that's a paper clipped little brochure or a postcard or a custom page on your website that is only meant to communicate that data. I think those two things, just the fact that, hey, thanks for joining, thanks for becoming a donor, thanks for your first gift, is the most important thing. And then if you can weave in a little bit more information, and maybe you can do that on the thank you letter itself. Maybe you don't need a second piece. That's one thing I really like about this Girls Inc. letter, is it does both of those things on just that letter. But they added other things, which is fine. But if you're worried about overwhelming, that may be the course you want to take. But it's a great thing to test. Maybe you have two versions. Maybe you have kind of a heavier one and a lighter one. 50% of the people get the heavy one, 50% of the people get the lighter one. Maybe do that for 3 months, and then look at, were there any differences in retention rates from the people in one group versus the next? Because everyone listening to this has a different donor community, and there's tons of people like me that are giving advice, good and bad. But the only way you're really, really going to know what's best is if you test things. But I think it's a worthy activity, because if you can find like, okay, this is the thing that works the best broadly, it's not going to make an impact on 100% of people. You're not going to get to 100% retention. It's probably not possible. But that's the best way. So that's an awesome thing to test, is what is in that welcome kit. What do you say? When does it go out? What's included? Because then you'll really know. But no matter what you do, both versions of that test, I think, should say, thanks for your first gift. Let them know that they're a brand new donor.
I think we probably have, as we're over, we're going to have one or two more questions here.
Okay.
I know Stacy put a question in. How often should you be doing stewardship outreach to donors? We are doing it once a month, but we are running out of ideas for content. We also layer on impact newsletters each quarter, holiday cards, thankathon calls, etc.
Dang, that sounds great. That sounds like more than I usually come across, and I mean that as a compliment, not as a negative at all. If it's going well, keep doing it. If it's not going well, you might want to scale back. And again, you might want to scale it back for like half of the people and see if it makes a difference. Because again, you're really never going to know for sure if you don't test those things. But ideas, I heard the question for ideas. One thing that I've seen be really powerful is when donors can hear from other donors, right? So often they hear from us as nonprofit employees. Maybe they hear from volunteers like board members. Maybe they even hear from service recipients. And all of that is good. And if you're already doing this, forgive me, just tell me to pipe down because you already thought of it. But donor interviews, this is why I give, and maybe that's something that goes out. I think that could be a cool idea as well, and maybe start to kind of foster that community between the donors themselves. But you really can't go wrong with like impact stories or outcome stories. This kid goes through our program and now they're the first kid in their family to get into college. Or, here is an animal that got adopted this month. Like, look how happy this family is with the animal. That's always a good fallback. We saw that from the research that I zoomed through in the beginning. But donor receives information showing who is being helped, donor thinks you're effective. 2 out of these top 7 things are directly tied to the work you're doing. So if you can tell those stories, if you can kind of, toot your own horn a little bit, I think that's okay, because all of you listening to this, I know, do awesome things on a daily basis. But also tell your coworkers, like, hey, you on the mission side, or you on the volunteer side, like, if you ever see anything or something interesting happens, like, let us know, let the fundraising department know, because you could maybe crowdsource that content from other departments and take a little bit of that pressure off of you trying to run those things down or find those things or generate those stories. Put it on social media, or crowdsource it from your service recipients. There was an organization here in Indy that they help at-risk youth in some way. I'm not remembering the exact specific way, but they did a campaign where they invited the parents of the kids that like come to their programs to just shoot a quick cell phone video of what that has meant to their family. And they got hundreds of these videos, and that was like their Facebook content for the whole year. And they barely lifted a finger to generate those things. Plus, it really empowered the families of those service recipients to, talk about what they go through and how much of a difference the organization makes. So like crowdsourcing that content, now that I really think about it, may be your way to overcome maybe running out of ideas, because it sounds like you want to keep doing all those touch points and it's working for you. So I would seriously consider maybe some way to crowdsource those videos, photographs from the people that you're actively helping.
Well, it looks like Stacy has quite a few different things going on, and I think the only thing that
Email me.
Yeah, I think we may need to do that. So I do want to just let everyone know that we will be again sending out a presentation copy with all of the resources Stephen talked about. We will include our peer-to-peer blog with a spreadsheet, all of these great notes that Stephen shared with us. Stephen, thank you so much for everything. And thank
Anytime.
you,
Thanks for having
everyone.
me.
Everyone joining us and staying on. One of the free resources that Stephen didn't get to share that we'll be sending with you is a link to the art and science of retaining digital donors, amongst other things, as well as his blog that he wrote with us. So his contact information and the QGIV team's contact information will also be in the email. So please, take note of that. Don't forget to take the survey. And we really do hope that all the information we covered today really does help. And thank you. And we will be in touch. You have a great day. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone.
See ya.